We developed this in 2003 and 4 in our clinical trial called Memerobics. This was humor aerobics in Corvallis, Oregon. What we did was to teach people how to tell one joke. We let them pick out of a pile of jokes every week. We'd come in twice a week and have them practice the joke. Laughing seemed to be something that worked. And look at what we found again from Oxford. All these benefits from laughter, especially what's called shared laughter. So we found out that lousy jokes are good, so we voted on what was the worst short joke and what was the worst long joke. And I don't have time to tell you the long joke unless we have time at the end. But the worst, top of the heap, worst joke was, what kind of coffee? What kind of coffee did they serve on the Titanic? When you tell a joke, all you jokers, to a jokey on the phone especially, repeat it. What harm does it do to repeat it? And what I'll do is I'll repeat it. So, what kind of coffee, pause on coffee so the person gets the part you need, did they serve on the Titanic? Pause just a little bit and say, Sanka. Yeah. Oh, that's a stinker. Michael said, are you sure we want to tell that? Yeah. Michael, you go ahead.
I can't stop him. He'll tell whether it. So we've been through chocolate as representing food. We've been through socialization. Now we're going to get off into flowers, which are going to represent the environment and nature. And Roger, I'm going to gallop through. We're running behind. I want to save time for questions and answers. How many of you have seen the film My Love Affair with the Brain? Villages, OKC, has been showing this at various places. It's a terrific film. Marion Diamond was an early pioneer in the field of neuroscience. I love it that she's a woman. You know, there are not enough women in neuroscience. She really made important gains both in discovering and confirming the idea of plasticity, that the brain is responsive to differences. And one of the things, the main thing that she found was enriched environments. She created enriched environments versus impoverished environments, and she found when the subjects were in an enriched environment, they were healthier, they lived longer, they were happier, had all of these terrific benefits. What I want, at this point, I just wanted to call out and thank Concordia, Julie Davis, Villages OKC for bringing us here. We've had a terrific time, and we really love it. And when you think about an enriched environment, I think, we're in an enriched environment right here. You're doing this stuff that is going to stimulate your brain, challenge you with something new. When you live in this kind of area, it's safe. One of the ways that we wanted to look at this, everybody know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? The idea that you sort of have these different levels of needs. Well, on the lower level, is it safe? Are you comfortable? Do you have food? Are your basics there? And that clearly is important. And here you not only get food, you get really good food, but also are the higher levels of self-development, the opportunity to give back. Those are equally important. And I suggest, one of the reasons that Roger and I are so supportive of organizations like Villages OKC and like senior living communities like Concordia is it provides this kind of, enriched environment. Think about these cogwheels when you go home. How can you achieve all of these things? And many of them are easier when you're in a supportive community like this. I was telling Julie, my mother and father lived in a continuing care community, and I brought my daughters over to visit them one time, and afterwards they said, Dad, that's like summer camp for Grandma. She's like, she's got photo clubs, and she's got, she goes to the pool. So think about this. When we are working with individuals or with groups, just very quickly, we go through this MAPS process, we call it. First, you have to be motivated to do this stuff. And I hope now we're giving you some motivation to really do this love affair with your brain. Second is you have to assess what is putting you at risk and what is protecting you. So when you look at the handout, the cogwheel handout, look at the risks and the protections and figure out where are you maybe not doing as well as you should be doing. And then just do, to use Roger's word, a smidgen more each day. A little smidgen more, move in the right direction. Have a plan for it. It's usually not good enough to just say, oh, yeah, I'm gonna take yoga lessons. Well, when are you going to take yoga lessons? Where are you going to go? Are you actually going to do it on a Tuesday? Make a plan. And then there are skills that you need to sustain this, because these are not quick fixes. You can't go and exercise for a week and say, that's it, I'm good for my life. Or you can't eat good foods for one day and figure you got to sustain this over time. What do we have next? Yes, Roger. Roger's done a lot of interesting work in Portland Community College, where he was voted Adjunct Professor of the Year in Gerontology, by the way.
Thank you.
A lot of work on nature.
Thank you. When that award was awarded to me, I went to Atlanta to really find out how the deep end of neuroscience was translated to gerontology students. I found out that communities like Concordia, the ones we work with, the consulting, we are ahead of those college classes. So getting that national award was something that gave me a platform to simply tell the stories of what really works. We've been in the trenches. We know what people are challenged. We're not in a laboratory. Michael and I almost proudly say, we no longer do the research. We don't have time. We put the puzzle together by monitoring the evidence-based good news and throw out the ones that either aren't good, or if they look good, we need to wait until they're valid. And we know that the pipeline is full, the future is bright for all of us who are over the age of about 50, and this is the best era in history to be alive to see these breakthroughs. And one of them that just burst on the scene a couple of years ago is nature, enriched environments and nature. When you've got parks like you've got here in Oklahoma City and the lakes, and the ability to think of this phrase from this book. And when Florence and I met each other because of the book, and then we collaborated, we've given talks together. I give the neuroscience and she gives the neuroscience she found by going around the world and talking to the scientists in three places, in Finland, in South Korea, and Japan. And what they found is that they not only are doing the science of the benefits of going into nature, go on a hike, or go sit next to a tree. And don't just sit there and say, okay, I sat for a while, but sit for enough time that you get the oxygen that this tree is giving off. The soil is giving off fumes that you may not notice, but they found that someone who goes into a forest or a park that has enough of this oxygen canopy and other chemicals, they get healthier. Most important example is Korea and Japan. When their first responders have PTSD from a fire or from some police action and they are traumatically impacted, they don't give them a pill. They don't put them into therapy. They go to what are called healing trails with forest healing rangers that take them by the hand with a guided tour to meander on up to 3,000 miles of various trails, depending on what you need. So I would take Albert, who suffers from post-traumatic stress, and say, the pill is a second level. We'll see if we can just walk in nature. And see how fast I'm walking? It's called meandering. In the literature, in the science, it says we can't hike, we can't even walk fast, we don't even want to walk slow. You meander with a look for soft fascination. What do I want to look at? A fern? Do I want to look up into a tree? Have you ever been in a park where there's lots of trees that are straight up, that you walk and you finally look up, it looks like a canopy, it looks like a church, doesn't it? They found that just looking up affects the brain. So nature does have fix. You go to parks like Martin Park and others. It's called, we labeled it neuronature. It's healthy. You don't need to think of nature as going somewhere and driving. Nearby nature is go to a tree, especially if it's got an odor from the trunk, and sniff it in. It goes right to the brain because your neurons are waiting for you to give that to them. It's called tree tonic. And when the scientists who proved that tree tonic is beneficial for almost anyone's brain, they ask him, how long do I have to be next to a tree to benefit my brain? His answer was, how long you got? That's how magic this is. Forest bathing is important. But this is where I want you to go. I want you to go to flowers. Okay? When you're at flowers and you know that you can just sniff a flower, or if it doesn't have a scent, you admire the geometry of it. You just take time to admire. Touch the petals on a velvet rose instead of just admiring it with your eyes. Use all the senses. This photo made this photographer famous because it's a sequence. Here's the next one. Look at that. So if you take time to smell the roses or anything else, you have the chance of taking a time machine back to somewhere else. Think of the one scent that your grandma's house had outside her yard, an old-fashioned lilac or an old-fashioned this or that. When you sniff that tomorrow or next year, you're going to get the same memory of that person because of the power of nature. Michael?
So we have been through chocolate, socialization, environment, and nature. I want to circle back to this idea of longevity and quickly talk a little bit about happiness, because that's obviously going to be an important component of quality of life. The first question is, what is happiness? Everybody's going to have a different definition. We like this definition here: the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being, combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. So there are these two opposite ends of happiness. It's both the pleasure side, and that's certainly important, but there's also the meaning and purpose. I mean, that's one of the things that happens as we get older. If we retire frequently, we found our meaning in the context of work, and it's often somewhat difficult to find meaning and purpose as we get older. Joining places like Villages OKC, coming to Concordia, where you can get engaged in volunteerism and working with each other, is a wonderful way to find this happiness and meaning and purpose, both sides of these. The next question is, can we really increase our happiness? Oh, by the way, Sonia Lubomirsky is the researcher who did that, created that definition. She's a positive psychologist. She also did this research where the question is, can we really increase our happiness, or do we have a set point? Is it genetically determined? You know, some of us are just happier than others, some are not. What she found is, yes, there is indeed a set point, which is why when tragedies befall us, we usually bounce back. Or when we win the lottery. How many of you have won the lottery, by the way? When we feel terrific, but we sort of bounce back. But a full 40%, she found, I don't know how she figured this out, 40% is under our control. Our happiness is determined by what we do, what we think, the actions that we take, so you can actually cultivate your happiness. And this is one of the revelations of positive psychology. They realized that if you can get people out of depression, that doesn't necessarily make you happy. It just, they call it you're languishing, you're kind of in between. We really have to learn to be happy. We have to cultivate it. And one of the ways that you do that is by, they call it prioritizing positivity. And the idea here is you go through your day, think, what do I really like? What brings me pleasure? And are you structuring your life to do those things? Or are you spending a lot of time, doing other things which are more important than your happiness? Nothing really is more important than your happiness. Barbara Fredrickson, another positive psychologist, has determined that, I've heard others give different ratios, but we need 3 positives for every 1 negative. Because the negative, we take in the negative, we hold on to the negative. It's a survival thing from evolutionary, because we needed to pay attention to danger, because if we didn't pay attention, we might get eaten by a lion. So we take in the negative and hold on to it. You have to prioritize positivity, do that 3 to 1. She also has this wonderful theory called the broaden and build theory. And what she's found is that when you are in a positive mood, your brain opens up, your perspective opens up. Contrary-wise, when you're fearful or when you're angry, you get into the fight or flight. You've heard fight or flight, or your focus narrows because you got to face that threat, and everything else shuts down. We are creative, we grow, we learn, we expand when we're positive and when we're feeling safe. Then our brains can relax and open up. So it's very important. At this point, I didn't give you much warning. I'm sorry, but why don't we do this is another brain break.
For sake of time, what we're going to do is pass out a ginger blueberry treat that's another liquid. Or what are we passing out? Is it the chocolate? They're called shooters, of course. This is, again, it's a liquid. I want you to use the same taste aerobics, but I woke up at 3 this morning and got an idea that I told Michael that I would try to tell a story of some people who I met when I was in the clinical trials, and I decided to do it. I rarely do it, and I told Julie we had to change our PowerPoint at the end because I said I want to put pictures of Art Kemp and his wife Vivian in and tell a story of a couple that when I was an activity director and we were going through our clinical trials and I was trying out new things, observing, I treated them all like my one grandparent, my Nana, who died in her 90s just before I burned out as a lawyer. And what I found, and so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and enjoy this wonderful treat, tasting by looking and smelling and feeling. But this is Vivian and Art Kemp. They were not married when I first went into the community, but they were friends, but both of their spouses had died. And they were friends to a point, right after I got there, that they were in love and they decided to get married. And I remember driving the van with people over to the church and having everybody watch them join. So this is a love story. This is a love story that has these components. I want you to look down here. This is the Oregon Garden. The Oregon Garden. And let me back up. This man, Art, was a tall man, but he hunched over quite a bit as he walked. And I knew at the time that Vivian was what I now know is called masking for Art. Art had really lost his momentum for life. His memory was not as it was. He was very proud and didn't want to talk very much and didn't want to go out very much because he wasn't feeling like he was himself. So here he is with Vivian, and every time they came to an event, he said virtually nothing. And when someone asked him, she helped him answer. And we know couples like that one helps the other. And what was happening is the joy that I saw in everybody, most others, wasn't with Art. But when I played big band music at one of my ear aerobics, and I love big band music because my dad, Fritz, loved Artie Shaw and Glenn Miller and all the classics, In the Mood. I loved that stuff. And so I played it. And I loved doing it for ear aerobics as an event where we talk about the music and where were you when. Art's eyes lit up. His eyes lit up to a point that I said, I'm going to note that. So I noted it. Art's eyes were alive. I wanted to then do something, and planning for the next August. It was in the spring, the next August. Glenn Miller Orchestra still tours. Do you know that? Yeah. And they hit note for note. First I thought, I wish Dad were alive. He'd go with me. But I decided I'm getting tickets. And it was at the Oregon Gardens. That's on the picture I'll show you. At the Oregon Gardens. It's a natural amphitheater, and they've got a level place up on top, and you look over. If we could get permission to bring a load of people with wheelchairs and walkers and sit on that crest, we could be safe and we could watch the Glenn Miller Orchestra play. And so what we did was to tell Vivian that Art is going to be the target of what we call precision applied cognitive intervention. We now say we're pointing at him. He's the one, but we're going to take a whole truck or van load. So we end up going there, but I did one more thing. I had heard from Vivian when I was just chatting with her about Art that he still had his Navy uniform under the bed and that it still fits him. And I said, okay, if we asked him to put it on, would he put it on? She said, I don't know. What if we did it at the intermission of the Glenn Miller Orchestra concert? Because my dad told me that when he heard Glenn Miller, the live performance, it hit him in the heart, because at the intermission, it's followed by the salute to the armed forces. They play all 4 of the songs, including, my dad was in the Navy, Anchors Aweigh. So I said, if we can get him in the uniform, I think I can come up with something. So first half is over. The scene that is down here on the picture, that scene is what we saw. Now picture yourself on the edge, and I know that we're going to then take Art, which we did. We walked all the way to the van, got in the van in the intermission, sat down, and Vivian and I just asked him, would you want to get in your Navy uniform for the second half? He could have said no. He said, I sure would. Remember, he is somebody who was not engaged, but he got in the uniform, and when they both came out, and I waited for them, they both came out, he was standing like this. He walked with, I was right with him, he was in the middle, Vivian over here. We're walking through the crowd at the concessions, and I realized as I was witnessing this that they didn't need me. I kind of let them get ahead of me. It was like the dang sea was parting with people turning around to look at this sailor as he's proudly walking. So we get up to the edge here. Now see the picture up here of Art, Vivian, and that's Martha Kempthorne. Everybody in that group, when they saw him, of our group, they looked at him as he stood, just as you see there, as he stood on the edge. But the magic happened. Remember, this picture was taken at the beginning. The sun wasn't down, but it's a sunset evening event. The sun goes down during the intermission, and we've got this golden rays of suns that are just barely hitting us, and I couldn't have scripted it better. I wish I had a picture. But Art is standing there when the intermission is over, and they're getting ready to go, and they start the 4 songs. He stood at attention the entire time. But what happened, if you see down here the chairs, and this was 2003, the chairs are the old-fashioned chairs that squeak. You ever have those chairs that squeak? Okay. So everybody's sitting down except Art. He's standing there in the sun, and the chairs in front of us were squeaking because this guy poked that guy and said, look, this person, and the squeak sound went all the way down to the front. And by the time it was over, all 4 of the Anchors Aweigh and all of the songs got finished. Everybody applauded, but they were this group that had noticed him. They turned to him and applauded him, and he saluted them. And I thought, what did that do for his brain? I look back on that, and I witnessed something that I now know, as I study neuroscience, was a flood of chemicals. Would that have an effect for a day, a week, a month? Remember, chemicals stay in the system. It changed his life. Not only did that work, but you see this right here? This is a photo that I took because every year we took them to the nation's largest Veterans Day parade on Veterans Day in November, west of the Mississippi, is in Albany, Oregon, a little town that's about 20 minutes away. So we had him in the uniform. He knew it was going to be Veterans Day. He started participating in things. But Veterans Day was a knockout because not only did he stop the parade, but he stood in the pouring rain saluting every flag. You know how many flags there are in the Veterans Day parade? He saluted every flag. And when the Grand Marshal, who was this officer, when he got there and saw Art, he stopped the parade. And the 2 Navy guys just talked to each other back and forth. And then I said, can I take a picture of the 2 of you? Art was interviewed by a TV station in Eugene. And the clip that we got of him talking, I wish I had time to let you hear him. He could not have made those sentences go together of how much his Navy service meant to him if he hadn't somehow been sparked by both Vivian, of course, and the love that she gave him, but also that pride in him making a comeback. So that's what we give you, is ideas to say, how can you apply that to this person or that person? Because this is a challenge. We don't want brains that are outlived by the body for 10 and 20 years. We want to have the health span of the brain match the health span of the body, and at that point, we've succeeded. Our goal is to educate the world, because it ain't a pill. It's educating everybody what to do, how to do it, and then you're on your own. You've got to figure out why you're going to do it for yourself or your loved ones. And we also wanted to honor somebody who we understand is, let's go forward here. Let me go forward. This is the one I wanted to show you. This is the interview. And when they found out that he was there, they not only put that on, but they highlighted that as something in the parade that was totally unexpected. And when friends of Art's and Vivian's heard about it, they wanted to see it too. And they called up. Art was a changed person. And that's the type of thing that we hope to get to. Now let me tell you, when we found this quote from Will Rogers, anybody here know Will Rogers? Look at how important this is, not just for Michael and me. We said that describes us, but it also can describe you. Success is simple. It's really simple, according to Will Rogers. And it's 3 things. You have to know what you're doing. We hope we know, but we don't know it all, because next week there'll be another good study we can put in there. You need to know how your brain works. You have to love what you're doing. We love what we're doing. But you also have to love your brain, and that every time you do a smidgen of this or 5 smidgens of that, you are doing something and you are making a difference. And finally, you have to believe in what you do. We believe in it because science has caught up to where we've been for almost 20 years. But science is going to be the one that'll tell you you're on the right path as long as you continue to date your brain. This is a happy hour for your brain. Take your brain out on dates that are for both of you, and fall in love with your brain right now and make it last for a lifelong love affair. So thank you very much. Michael, you want to wrap up?
Yeah. I always ask Roger to tell that story because he gets choked up, and I love watching that. So let's ask this again. Given what you've learned, how many, and we're ramping it up, 120, how many of you want to take a shot at 120 years old? All right. How many at least of you are going to make that more likely by having a love affair with your brain? Yeah, all right, terrific. So we will answer any question you have. We're not clinicians, we're not doctors, so don't ask us how we can fix your bum knee or something like that. But if you have any questions about the brain, about anything that we've said, can you really prevent dementia and Alzheimer's? Isn't it hereditary? Part of the answer is there is one kind of dementia, early onset dementia, that is largely hereditary. There are certain people who have a specific gene that makes you more susceptible to Alzheimer's, but that's an important thing. You're susceptible. It doesn't mean you automatically are going to get it. If you do all of the wrong things that we sort of tried to articulate, you're more likely to get it if you have that gene in particular. But if you do all of the right things, you may actually outlive the degeneration of your brain and, live long enough so that you can prevent. There's a, go ahead, Roger.
I want to point out that the question really was framed around, you said that beautifully, can you really prevent dementia? Yes. You may not be able to prevent Alzheimer's or all types, but dementia is not a disease, it's a symptom. It's cognitive decline that applies to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and others. So the question until 2014 was, we really can't say, Michael and I cannot say that what you do can prevent dementia or the symptoms. We now know, we're pretty sure from one study out of Sweden that has been replicated now around the world except the United States, the finger study from Sweden. Finnish geriatric is F-I-N-G-E-R. The finger study showed that if you use 4 of our 6 cogwheels and take a group that is an older group and have them really change their lifestyle for 2 years by coaching, having them coach, little changes but make them sustain for 2 years, then take the trainer wheels off, they have changed their mindset, they've changed their lifestyle, and they changed their cognitive decline. So they prevented. When she presented at Copenhagen, the headline was, quoting her, "We now know we can prevent cognitive." The can is important. Not you will, but if you work hard. Michael talked about the protein. Some of you will know that a protein is a hallmark with a higher risk. So let's say I have the hallmark and you don't. Life ain't fair that I have to do more than you, but at least now I know I have to work a little harder. So your choice, if you have that susceptibility or you think a relative died of Alzheimer's, which may not be true, but what if it is? It just means that you have to decide to do something or nothing. What are you going to do? Just nothing? Do 4 somethings because you have that in your background. The only downside is you might get a lot healthier and not have that gene. Michael?
Told a story on the radio show. I'll get to you in a second. Good interview. We told a story. There's a famous nun study where they studied nuns up in Minnesota. Was it Minnesota? And Kentucky? Oh, it was in Kentucky. Okay. There was one nun that they tracked for her whole life, and one of the things that the nuns did was they volunteered to allow them to autopsy their brains after they died. Sister Bernadette was always acing her cognitive test. She was at the top level throughout her life, and I think she lived into her 90s. When she died, they autopsied her brain, and it was full of the plaques and tangles that are associated with Alzheimer's. You've heard this before, you know this. And it was the brain of an Alzheimer's patient. They could not figure out how did this woman escape Alzheimer's. Eventually, what it led to was this reserve theory and the idea that certain people, and probably Sister Bernadette, lived the kind of life that built up reserve brain cells, more brain cells, so that when some got compromised, other ones, because of the plasticity of the brain, could take over for it, and also cognitive reserve. She didn't have one strategy for doing things. She had 4 or 5 different strategies. So if the one strategy got compromised, she had all these other things. So even though she had all of the symptoms of what people associate with Alzheimer's, she lived a happy and healthy life. Education is one of the things, and it's not so much having the degree, it's challenging your brain and being open and, it's novelty and keeping that going. So that's a great question. Thank you. You had a question. There are 2 things that happen. Interestingly, since I've been wearing hearing aids, my hearing has gotten better. And it's because there are 2 mechanisms that are at play. One is the follicles in the ear that get sort of destroyed over time, but it's also the part of the brain that has to process the sound. That's still working, but if it's not getting any input, it'll shut down. And that's what was happening to me. So when you can reintroduce quality input through the hearing aids, the brain will wake up again and say, oh, I didn't realize you wanted to hear. Oh, fine,
Okay, Michael, let me add in here, because I've known him, worked with him since 2007, and I noticed as soon as he got the hearing aids and said, just a minute, let me put my ears on, that he is not only sharper, and he was always sharp, but he's able to hear me because my voice is failing over the ears. That's a real bonus. But I really want you to know that Michael's point that when your brain atrophies from lack of hearing for a week, a year, a month, it does affect your cognitive abilities, but it doesn't kill the neurons. They're just buried under years of dust. And so as soon as you get the hearing aid and it says, oh, it's you again, your brain will then rewire and it'll get the dust off. So you'll make a comeback like, okay, I'm riding a bike. I did that before. So if you got a loved one who says, oh, I hate hearing aids, I can't hear, they've adjusted to a silent life that is going to lead to an isolation, and shortening of the joy of life is tied to hearing almost exclusively to people who refuse to even try something. So fight for your hearing is fighting for your memory as you age.